Kris Arnett is the proprietor of Kona Bay Books and Hilo Bay Books on the Big Island of Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming in.
Let's start at the beginning. Why do you own a bookstore?
Loaded question, I guess. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do. When I was in college,
Here in Hawaii?
actually in San Diego,
Okay.
San Diego, California.
Right.
You know, I was a literature major, and people would ask me, well, oh, so you want to teach? I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to work in a bookstore. I want to own a bookstore and, be in a bookstore. I've always wanted to be in the books.
And why?
I love talking about books. I love hearing about books. I love the exchange of ideas. I love the diversity of it. I love how books just touch on everything. When I used to interview people to work in a bookstore, they would come to me and say, Kris, I'm not a big reader. And I say, that's okay. What are your interests? Because there's a book on it.
That's what I come up with collecting.
Yes.
Is you can collect books in every imaginable subject.
Oh, yeah. Everything. It touches
Yeah.
on everything. So to answer your question, I've always wanted to be involved in the books and the people that it attracts.
Always interesting.
Yeah. I have met so many interesting people from all walks of life with so many interests and have had so many surprising experiences because I've always worked in a bookstore. I just love it.
Parents, did they drag you into bookstores when you were a kid?
No, my father was a barber, and
So you like to talk to people?
he was, if you didn't go to the bar and talk to the bartender, you went to the barber shop and talked to the barber.
And gave them all your troubles.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we had all walks of life in that environment, and I just always entertained myself with books.
So how did it happen then?
That I came to own the store?
What did you do after college?
Oh, well, while I was still in college, I started working in a bookstore. It was
Okay.
the Upstart Crow in San Diego.
Is it still around?
I think so.
Okay.
There were rumors last year that it was going to shut down after about 30 years in business, but I think I saw it was still open. I worked at the Upstart Crow and started in their cafe and was finishing my degree, and I worked for them for about 4 years. Managed a shop for them in Long Beach, and then in the early 90s, Borders began their big expansion from the East Coast to the West Coast, and so I started working for Borders. I worked for them for 17 years.
And so worked your way up the ladder a bit?
I worked, I managed for them, I trained for them, I traveled a bit for them. And then, of course, in, 2010 or 2009, I started thinking, okay, I've had enough time working for other people. I would really like to have my own. And so I started looking for opportunities, and the opportunity to purchase Hilo Bay Books came up.
What year was that?
That was 2010. And so I purchased Hilo Bay Books while managing a Borders here on the Big Island.
Okay, so you moved to Hawaii then?
Over 20 years ago.
And you managed
Borders.
in Hawaii?
Correct.
Where, in Honolulu or?
No, first on Maui, then
Okay.
in Hilo, then in Kona.
You mean they had Borders in these? How big are these towns?
Oh, well, they're big enough.
Like, what's the population?
Oh gosh.
Roughly. 500,000, 200,000?
Probably about that.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course with all the visitors
Enough
coming
enough
through.
to support Borders for.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It was wonderful back in the 90s when Borders came to Hawaii, because on the islands there wasn't this big selection of books and music, and it was just wonderful.
There's a lot of bad things to say about big box bookstores, but there's also a lot of wonderful things about them.
There is, absolutely. It's a double-edged sword. As far as my experience in Hawaii, I've been selling books in Hawaii for over 20 years. And when big box came to Hawaii, it actually made books more accessible to a lot of people where it hadn't been accessible, because as a independent bookseller, it's not cost effective to be a bookseller in the islands if you're shipping the books over. So Borders was like a heaven sent to a lot of the population. They could go in, they could touch, they could read, and it was wonderful.
And anything they couldn't find, they could order.
Absolutely.
Easily.
So as Borders was declining, I started to look for opportunities, and that's when I saw the opportunity to get Hilo Bay Books, and that introduced me to the world of used books and antiquarian books, which of course was just the next natural progression in my personal career, and I've fallen in love with it. So I had the Hilo shop, and then in 2012 I was able to purchase this already existing Kona bookstore, the Kona side. And
so just to explain, you've got stores on both sides of the island, in the big cities that are the two big cities on the island.
Yep.
I know because I drove from here across the island.
And it's a beautiful drive too.
It really is.
Uh-huh.
It is. There's I don't know the names of those trees, but they got a purplish flower.
Oh, the jacarandas.
And then there's this complementary color of a kind of a yellowish, rusty color.
I think those are the mock orange, I think.
Together, it's gorgeous. Yeah. And then there's these kind of circular mounds that push out of the ground too along the way.
Yeah, those are called pu'us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Glad I talked to you.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a lovely drive, and now, just like this store, your one in Hilo Bay is kind of a warehouse, not quite as big as this one. So, tell me about the market here. Is it like mostly locals that buy, or is it mostly tourists that buy, or a combination, or?
It's a healthy mix of both. On the Hilo side, it's mostly the people who live on the island. Hilo does have a tourist market, but it's mostly, a local market is who we sell to. Here in Kona, it's a healthy mix of both, with a side order of my snowbirds who come and stay here on the island for, a few months at a time. I have a very strong regular customer base. I see them come back every year, or every other year, or, every week. And then every day I see at least 3 or 4 people walk through the door and just stare open mouth like, wow, I had no idea this was in here, and which that brings me so much joy. And we'll look up and say, oh, you've never been here, welcome to Book Paradise.
Well, that was my reaction. We're here not that long, and I thought, okay, we'll just veg out. There's nothing for the literary tourist here. And then I did my search to see what was going on the internet, and here's this store, and I saw a picture on your website.
Yeah.
Stacks and stacks and stacks of books. So I was pretty excited about that.
It's
just so unexpected. Okay, so I noticed a lot of suspense, a lot of romance. Of course, that's catering to. You got to go with what sells.
That is my bread and butter.
Right.
And you'll note it's all up front. We have the beach. The classic phrase, the beach read. And when people come over from the mainland, they're looking to escape, to relax. And we hear it all the time. Oh, I haven't read a book in months or a year, but they're here and they want to get back to that.
Yeah.
So, I have a lot of baby boomers here, a lot of retired people, and they're just ferocious readers, and so they're reading their stacks of science fiction, their stacks of romance. They come in with their list. They're very dedicated.
List of what their favorite authors' works?
The books they've read, the books they haven't read, so that they can keep it all straight. That's my bread and butter. The leisure reading, if you will.
So what's the secret to your success, do you think?
Being excited about books. Being excited about people reading. When people come in and they start telling us about a book they just read, we don't interrupt them. We let them just keep going on about their joy in reading this book, whether it's a literary classic or it's James Patterson. Just people being excited about reading, and so they keep coming back because they know that we share that excitement with them.
So it's about a relationship with customers.
Absolutely. My counterpart on the Hilo side, I call him my Hanai brother. He's my adopted brother, and he manages the store in Hilo. And we began a conversation several years ago about people who love books. We are in a special club that only we get. Whether you're a collector of sacred antiquarian books, or if you just like the popular fiction, it's a special club. We get it. You're a book person, I understand you. I get it. I get that joy, that tingle you get when you've just discovered a story that's very exciting. And we don't discriminate between what people read.
You don't look down your nose at someone.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. We really do strive to break down the barrier, that stereotype of book people being snobbish. And we really try to have people come in and feel comfortable.
Because I know it can be intimidating going into, especially an antiquarian bookstore, and that's a problem. This sort of condescending attitude that's out there. Obviously it's not everywhere, but speaking of which, do you have a section for antiquarian books?
I do. We keep it up front under our glass. That's the stuff I love. I get the tingle when that stuff comes in. You can see how special it is. That's
one of the thrills of being a bookseller. It's just every day there's a possibility that something really neat will come through the door, right?
Yeah. Treasure hunt is the phrase I hear often. We do have that, but that is not our bread and butter. I love it, but that's not.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
And we do have those people come in, and we do have some of that.
What do you have, right now?
Oh, well, I've got thank you for asking. I have Curious George Gets a Job. That's the second book Ray did, so I've got a first edition of that without a jacket, unfortunately.
Okay.
Without a jacket, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot cheaper.
Yeah, but still very, very special.
Very collectible, yeah.
We had just sold a copy of a book called Tales of the Night Rainbow. Now, it's not an old book, but it's a very sought-after book here in Hawaii. A lot of Hawaiian history is told through the eyes of visitors or imports or missionaries. And Tales of the Night Rainbow is very beloved by people on the island because it is actually the Hawaiians telling it like it is.
Their own story.
Yeah.
Telling their own story.
Their own story, correcting some misconceptions that have spiraled out of control through time, if you will. And so just sold a copy of that.
When was that published?
Well, this particular edition was published in the 90s, but it was originally published back in the 80s. Early 80s.
Who wrote it?
Co-authored by Polly Lee, and the second author escapes me, but they essentially went to the island of Molokai and collected tales from some of the families there and compiled a lot of information, and then they actually kind of sat down and published some of that.
So it's kind of like an anthology then? Kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why it's called Tales of the Night Rainbow.
Who published that, do you recall?
Kamehameha Schools Publishing.
Which is?
A publisher over on Oahu. It's an extension of the Bishop Museum Trust. Good publishers for Hawaiiana history, arts, culture, all of that. They're wonderful. They're probably the most respected, if you will, Kamehameha Publishing.
Any other local publishers that are sort of renowned?
There's Watermark Publishing. They're very good. They do a lot of feng shui for Hawaii. They do a lot of how-tos, if you will. Mutual publishers, they do a good job. Of course, there's always the University of Hawaii Press, who does a lot of scholarly and academic publications. And then there's Best Press, owned by Buddy Best. He's been publishing for many, many years. In fact, he was the publisher who for many years kept a Hawaii classic called Pidgin to the Max, I should say, has sold thousands and thousands and thousands of copies and very beloved by people here in Hawaii.
What's that one about?
Pidgin to the Max. It is...
How do you spell that?
Pidgin, P-I-D-G-I-N. T-O, D-A, Max, M-A-X.
Okay.
Pretty much a glossary of the local dialect, Pidgin.
Okay.
The Pidgin dialect here, and it's kind of done in a cartoon format, and like I said, it's sold thousands of copies. When people see a copy of this book, they just light up because it brings back so many cherished memories of growing up. They're like, and it's funny, it's hysterical, and it's funny because it's true. It tries to explain where the language came from and how it kind of developed, and it kind of is a guide to imports like myself on what these words actually mean.
And it's in use.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's get back to the reason for your success. One is the relationship with your customers. What about this kind of the specifics about what do you buy? Like, what do you buy that obviously you're going to buy what sells? Mm-hmm. So what sells? We've talked about romance and suspense. But what about above that?
Metaphysics. Anything metaphysical, for lack of a better word, new age, is very popular. Cookbooks. People still like grabbing a cookbook and just opening up and having it there. That's a big seller for us. We have a very large military section. We're very proud of it. So our military history, World War II, Vietnam, all of that is a big seller here. We dedicate, how many rows is that? I mean, a whole 12 shelves, 15 shelves plus of military history.
Doesn't matter that it's not connected to Hawaii anywhere.
Right. We do have a Pearl Harbor section or a subsection, but just any military history. We have people coming in with their lists that they've, how many times have I heard, I've been looking for years for this book and I found it in Kona. We have a very nice selection of that.
And how do you get your books? Like, obviously there's a certain number that come in the door.
Mm-hmm. Here's the surprising thing. 95% of our inventory comes to the door.
Wow.
You have to remember we're on an island.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. To get them here, that was
Mm-hmm.
my question was, how do you get them here?
It's cost prohibitive to
Yeah.
ship them here. So this inventory was built over the course of about 15 years, and it comes through our door. 95%.
So really, you're getting the customers to do the heavy lifting by
Exactly.
bringing their books to the island, and then when they're finished with them, they bring them here. So I would assume that you've got it's pretty important, some sort of program that they can bring them in and get a certain credit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's we use a very standard program that most used bookstores do. 50% of our selling price in store credit or 25% in cash. We keep it simple. So they bring them to us, but it'd be my dream to be able to go travel and do big book purchases and things like that. I would love that, but it is cost prohibitive and we just can't do that in today's market. So it comes through our doors. And surprisingly, yes, tourists bring them in, but you would be surprised most of it actually comes from people who live here on the island. Hawaii can be very transient, so we have a lot of people moving here and moving off. And
So getting rid of their books every time they have to move.
absolutely, and we hear that quite often. Oh, we're moving. Oh, we're moving.
Did they call you up and you go out and do house calls? Or?
Sometimes we do that, but most of the time they bring them in. There have been times that I've made house calls and I've gone and picked up books. We do that. It's not our usual.
Right.
It's a special circumstance.
What's the population of the island?
I couldn't say specifically. We were speaking earlier, I think about 500,000, if not more. I'd have to look that up.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
I was a lit major. I wasn't good with the numbers.
Yeah, but it'd just be interesting to get an idea of, you've got all these books. What's the base population that they come from?
It's interesting. I've been in Hawaii for over 20 years, and there's each side of the island on the Big Island has a different personality. And this is something I noticed when I was working for big box retailers. The Hilo side always had more customers, but they spent less. So you actually had to work harder on the east side of the island. More customers, more transactions, but at a lower price point. And Kona, it has more of a disposable income. And so we had less customers, but they spent more. So
that's an interesting reflection, isn't it, of the character of the population?
Yeah, each side of the island definitely has its own personality, and that's another thing that I really enjoy.
Why?
Why do I like it?
Yeah, why do you enjoy that?
Because once again, that's what I love about this business.
Different kinds of people?
Different kinds of people, the different experiences. On the other side of the island, you have more of a working class.
So obviously you've got different stock over there.
Absolutely.
What's the main difference between the stock?
I sell a lot more automotive books on that side. I sell a lot more crafting books on that side. I sell a lot of more how-to books over on that side. It's very practical. On the Kona side, which tends to be a little bit more kickback, more retirement community, I've got my more leisurely reading, if you will. I dedicate more space to that, percentage-wise. So it's really interesting. Also, there's a bigger spiritual community on the other side. So my metaphysics really flies out the door on the other side.
Because they feel like they need more support.
There's more remote areas on that side of the island, and so
Right.
when people do spiritual pilgrimages or retreats or reflection. The east side of the island does have more remote space for that introspection, if you will.
Yeah.
Where on the Kona side, it's more resorts, not as much. You have spiritual people everywhere. I don't mean to mislead you there,
No.
but there's more of that happening on the other side. And of course, that side of the island, it is closer to the volcano, and the volcano, is perceived with such power and energy, and there are a lot of people who make that pilgrimage to the volcano just to experience that intensity and that living island and that growth, if you will. Very powerful for a lot of people.
So how do volcano books sell?
Not as much as you'd think. It actually, a lot of the volcano books actually sell up at the volcano. Well, we get over here or on the Hilo side, I saw this book at the bookshop at the volcano. We get that, but that's where people don't seem to get interested in the volcano until they're actually there, which I do highly recommend because the volcano is absolutely beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were lucky enough to see a bit of lava jumping out yesterday.
Oh, in the caldera?
Not a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity over there right now that hasn't happened in like a century. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's, they were saying it's the most active volcano in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the last time the caldera there in the Hawaii National Park had that much activity was when Mark Twain was visiting Hawaii and was writing about his experiences here.
When was that?
Oh gosh, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, when he was writing his letters.
Yeah, he got around, didn't he?
He did.
He was a literary tourist.
He was.
Any other famous authors that are connected with the island that you're aware of?
Robert Louis Stevenson, Jack London, spent a lot of time in Hawaii. There's another traveler, Isabella Bird. She wrote 6 Months in the Sandwich Islands. A lot of people still look for that book. Of course, here in Kona, we love Hunter S. Thompson and his infamous Curse of Lono that was illustrated by Stedman. I get many requests for that book. The good news is they did republish it did a reprint of that book in 2014, so it's not so hard to find anymore. The illustrations are wonderful. I often recommend the Taschen edition because it's beautiful, gorgeous, big book.
Taschen's an amazing company.
Oh, man.
We were at a store that they have in Paris.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She does it for the love of it. I think I don't know if they make a huge amount of money, but the books are amazing.
Beautiful. And with Stedman's illustrations, it really brings that story alive. It's beautiful.
Maybe you could tell me a bit about the criteria you use to hire people.
Well, I'm lucky in this respect. Borders in Hawaii went out of business in 2011, so all of a sudden there were a lot of booksellers who didn't have a job. So while not all my employees are old Borders employees, most of them are. So I'm fortunate enough to have been working with the people I work with for at least 10 years. So the criteria is you have to be a people person. I think in bookselling in general, if you hire nice people, you're going to be okay. You have to be able to talk to people. As far as the book knowledge goes, that comes
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's ironic, though, because a lot of book people are not people.
Yeah.
They're introverted.
Again, the stereotype.
But on the other hand, a book person is typically pretty knowledgeable. Mm-hmm. And so they've got lots of things to talk about.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The book part of it, that comes in time. Because if you have a love of books, it just blossoms in time. My goal is to hire people who just genuinely like talking to other people, and their book knowledge comes into play. And I'm fortunate that I have a lot of people who've had many years of bookselling experience. I mean, we tell people all the time, the combined knowledge and experience in both shops, we have over 100 years of experience, But the first criteria is you have to be a people person.
Just winding down, you've mentioned some famous writers that are connected or have been here. What about who are from Hawaii, either past or present?
Kiana Davenport, she's a novelist. She's most famous for her book about Hawaii called Shark Dialogues, which I highly recommend. It's a great book. It takes place here on the Big Island as well as Molokai, and you get some of that Molokai history about the leper colony they had there. But Kiana Davenport...
So is this fiction or nonfiction?
It's fiction. We have another author who lived here. Her name is Rebecca Cantrell. She right now is like a co-writer with some of James Rollin's suspense novels. But she's got in her own right her own novels, and so I remember working for Borders. She used to come into the cafe there, and when she was writing her first book that she got published. So Rebecca Cantrell, others who lived on the big, like I'm trying to think of contemporary ones.
These women still alive or?
Oh yeah, Rebecca. Yeah, she's. Oh yeah, both contemporary.
Okay.
Published in the last 10 years. Darian Gee, she lives up in Waimea, and she writes, I guess, chick lit for the lack of better words. She's pretty fun. She comes in pretty often, and I like recommending her books. Perfect for people who are visiting here in Hawaii. And then there's, we had a metaphysical author who lived here, Doreen Virtue. They used to feature her in a small bookshop on the other side of Kona called Kona Stories. Doreen Virtue, she writes about communicating with angels, and they used to do a lot of angel readings there. She's coming here. Off the top of my head, those are the ones I can think of.
Who do you think's the most famous Hawaiian writer of all time?
Novelist or just in general? Gavan Daws, in my mind. He is the author of a book I recommend all the time called Shoal of Time. And when people come in asking for books on Hawaiian history, I'm like, Shoal of Time, Gavan Daws.
When was that written?
I'm going to say it was published, I'm thinking, late 80s, early 90s, off the top of my head.
So he's a historian?
Yeah.
Lives here?
On Oahu, yes.
Born here?
That I don't know. I'd have to find out. Most famous. That's all I've got. I mean, there's many that I think are pretty famous, but then I go to the mainland like, oh, they don't know.
No one's ever heard of him. Yeah. Okay. But just finally, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but are there any are there any other first of all, do you ever hold any readings, or is that something you want to do, or are there readings on the island?
There are.
Or in Honolulu, or
it's really interesting. I've experienced this, I would say, my entire time selling books here in Hawaii. People really want book events. They don't go to them. It's really hard. It's the funniest phenomenon. And this was true when I was on Maui, when I was in Hilo. We have had author signings. They're usually attended by a few. As I was telling you about Kona Stories, the other bookshop that sells new books here on the island. It's a small bookshop. It's in Keaho, just the opposite end of Kona. Great book ladies. They sell the new books in town. And they have a great following, and they have book events. They're usually, again, not attended by a lot of people, but they're the go-to place for that. We've tried to have events. People don't come. You maybe get one or two. So again, it has to be cost effective. So we've had book clubs meet in the store, but they tend to fizzle out over time. And I think it's just, Hawaii is such a place where people spend so much time outdoors.
Yeah, I suppose if it's sunny out, you don't want to go into a bookstore. And
the town does tend to roll up at night as well. So,
Right.
people are usually at home in bed between 7 and 8. So we've tried to have events. They're not huge. But Kona Stories, they do a great job of it. So I always recommend the authors contact them because they've built that following.
Are there any other great used bookstores in Hawaii? That was my question.
Used
that you're
bookstores,
aware of. Used or antiquarian, and I'm talking Honolulu or wherever.
Well, it's funny. I'm not sure if they're still open, but on Oahu there was a place called Jellies, and I'm not sure if they're still open. On Kauai, there's a great bookshop. I forgot the name of it, but like on Kauai in Lahui, I think there was one used bookshop that's very much beloved. Man, I feel horrible not remembering their name.
We can look it up.
Yeah. But they're great. There's Book Buyers Hawaii on the Hilo side. There's one in Pahoa as well as Hilo, and it was started by a lady named Mary. She's wonderful.
That's on this island?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
on the east side of the island. But I do have to say, we are the largest used bookshop in all of Hawaii.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I can't imagine one bigger than this.
Yeah, we have over 2 miles of books in this shop, and actually a Canadian travel magazine actually called us the Powells of the Pacific,
Okay.
which is a huge compliment because
Yeah.
I'm a huge Powell's fan.
Right? Plus it's an alliteration too.
Yeah.
You gotta like that.
I love it. So we're the biggest. That's our claim to fame.
Just finally, you talked to me about wanting to be a literary tourist. And I am a literary tourist, so is there something that I'm missing in Hawaii? Is there something that the literary tourist absolutely must do when they're here aside from visiting your stores?
Well, I think it's important if you're on the Big Island to go to the Volcano. Go to the Volcano House, because that is where Robert Louis Stevenson, that is where Mark Twain, they did spend some time there, and you overlook the caldera there, and you are stepping back in time, seeing what they saw. It's really amazing. If you are on Maui, you need to go to Lahaina, because the first printing press in Hawaii was in Lahaina.
Now, is there a museum there or something?
I think it's in a very small museum, and I think it's very hard to find, but you can find it.
Okay.
But the first printing press is in Lahaina. That was the original capital of Hawaii, Lahaina, on the island of Maui, before they moved it to.
So that's what you would do. Anything
That's
else?
what I would do. Those are the two literary things I can think of.
Super.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for
Oh
talking
my
to us.
goodness! Thank you very much. I'm glad you found us. I say that so often. I'm so glad you found us.
It wasn't hard. It wasn't hard.
Good.
I've been speaking with Kris Arnett, who is the proprietor of Kona Bay Books and Hilo Bay Books. Your website is?
KonaBayBooks.com, HiloBayBooks.com. Takes you to the same place.
Very good. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.